Security guards, what's your creepiest/scariest story? Had a young female commit suicide in her car in the parking lot of a Harley-Davidson shop in the middle of the night. Years and other jobs later, I took new job and was seated next to a guy who turned out to be the boyfriend of the girl at the time. They were newly dating and he never understood what happened. I could tell the weight of it was still very much on his shoulders. I was able to confirm details as to what happened and answer questions. 2 weeks later my previous job called and begged me back. I worked there long enough to run into this guy, share the story and set him closer to peace, then left and went back to my old job. Fate. Oh no. It's like the smell from my dead hamster but 100 times worse. Oof. Oh how sad. I bet that sticks with ya. My dad used to work security guard jobs after he retired because he could. He was on site overnight shift at a paper mill here in Oregon that's part of a small town and is at the edge of the Cascades. He noticed over the course of about 3 nights that all of a sudden all of the little critters he was used to seeing in the lumber yard were just gone. It was weird and quiet, and he was about to set out on his rounds when something made him pause and take a big step backwards into the cover of the guard shack. It's a good thing, too, because the great horned owl's talons missed his head by about 6 inches. Those birds are fucking big, and they're territorial as fuck. Dad said they stuck around just long enough to kill every living thing under about 30 pounds in the area, and then they moved on. I used to do hospital security during COVID and many people have told me that they've experienced paranormal activity around the hospital. Especially on this one floor where there used to be a psych ward where the scariest ones were at. One housekeeping told me that they saw the ghost while cleaning that floor and even the pharmacy director experienced the same thing. They said it was the ghost of a male. I hope this post gets big. I love reading these kind of stories. I hate seeing AskReddit posts with 300 comments but 30 upvotes. At least the ratio is better on this one. I agree. Me too. There was a guy that would always be following or annoying a specific person. Had to step in to just try to keep the peace a few times. Things seemed to de-escalate for a bit but then the person stopped showing up for a while. Saw what happened on the news a couple weeks later and wasn't surprised. Well. Don't you fucking dare finish that story. That was fate. Had a guy work late in the office a few nights a week. One night I caught him microwaving fish in the break room. Definitely fate, smiling face. I was working at a medium-sized radiator factory. It required a foot patrol every 2 hours and a CCTV patrol every hour in between. It was a Friday night shift and the factory was shut down for maintenance one weekend, so I was told that the engineers would shut the compressed air system down before leaving. Normally my task at once the last shift engineers left. It got to around midnight and I had just finished patrolling the offices and entered the factory floor. All the lights were off so it was just me, my torch and a bank of amber safety lights on top of various presses, welders etc. As I walked down the side of the factory line there was this almighty hissing noise which came from the direction of the air compressor shed. Needless to say my pants went from black to brown. The engineers hadn't shut down the system as stated and a pressure relief valve decided to open. Had a great time writing up my near miss report because as you know pressurized manufacturing equipment is dangerous. In my early 20s I worked as a contract concierge, about 15 years ago. One night I called out at work because I hated working at this particular building. The residents were always upset about something. The building was basically falling apart because it was old and, from what I understood, the HOA was dishonest and lazy with upkeep. Anywho, the last night I worked the AC went out. I called the site manager to let him know what was going on. He was very rude and wanted me to write a statement summarizing everything that happened during the night. Odd to me, but okay. The residents were calling and coming down to the desk being rude. I worked overnight, which didn't make things any easier because I was by myself. I was so frustrated as to how the site manager handled the situation. I'm not a maintenance person. The next night I call out and never went back. When I spoke to the scheduler about that night, I told him I wouldn't be returning to that building. He told me it was a good thing I called out because the guy who took my shift received a call during the night to check a unit for whatever reason. He eventually had to get the master key to open the door to the unit, and the resident had hung himself in the shower. I hope the guy who took my shift is alright. Never heard anything. I would be terrified. The company I worked for did not renew their contract with this building. I quit shortly after that. In 2015, there was a news story about a building I also worked with during that time. I did enjoy working at this building. It was on the same street a couple of miles away. The top floor of the parking garage collapsed through all 7 levels. Employees had to park on the 7th floor, and I always parked on the opposite side next to the pool. Thankfully, no one was hurt. According to the article, residents said dirt and debris from the pool renovation was placed in same spot where the collapse occurred. Do remember thinking something like this could happen because the concrete looked a bit thin to me. The condominiums only being 14 years old at the time was also concerning. I'm no structural engineer. This doesn't really fit the question. LOL. But, I thought it was be cool to share. Not exactly a security guard but a soldier, and I don't know if that counts. But I once guarded an entrance to a military base alone maybe 3 months after I was recruited, and was greeted by a bunch of wolves/hyenas or something else along the lines. It was about 1 to 2 a.m. and I started hearing a lot of noises, went to check it out with my rifle, my walkie-talkie and my flashlight. It seemed that one of the, let's call them wolves, even though I'm 99% sure they weren't wolves, killed the other one and then started to howl, and in seconds I started hearing howls and sound of dogs crying and yelling around me. Suddenly I see the wolf that killed the other one walking towards me and looking directly in my eyes. He wasn't alone, he walked with about 5 others, all coming to me. In addition, I was surrounded, but they were the only ones coming towards me. So naturally I started making noises and throwing rocks at them, but it didn't really bother them. So at one point they were way too close for comfort, so I dropped my walkie-talkie and loaded my rifle and was about to shoot. My heart was beating the fastest it ever did my whole life, and I start yelling at them and stomping the ground with hopes that maybe this time it will work, and it did, and they left. My dad had a job going around and checking schools to make sure everything was properly alarmed/locked down during summer breaks. Had about 15 to 20 on his list and would try to bang them out all in an evening so he could have the next few days off. Told me that one of the schools was a Catholic elementary school, very run down and old/always gave him the creeps. There was a room in there that had a big-ass Virgin Mary statue, and it made him feel uncomfortable whenever he'd check in there, so he never spent much time hanging around that room. The last year he did that as a job, upon closer inspection, he discovered that the statue was actually hollow, so it could be moved around easier, presumably, and also that the eyes of the statue had small drill holes in them, so someone could hypothetically hide inside and watch people without them knowing. To this day that's what he speculates was happening when he'd be in there, kind of far out there if you ask me, but fuck, it's creepy as hell to consider, LOL. Oh hell no. Once we had a seemingly homeless guy crawl into a crawl space trying to hide in our casino. He suffocated and we found his body 5 days later after a smell and biomatter had appeared on one side of the wall.